All right, good evening, everyone. It's 5 o'clock on Monday, July 1st, so we'll go ahead and call this meeting of the Utility Service Board to order. Our first item on the as a reminder, if any board member has any conflict of interest with any of the items on the agenda, then please recuse yourself. And our first item on the agenda is our petitions and communications. Do we have any public comments tonight? Next, we have approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any questions, additions, or corrections?
Excuse me, hold on a second.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Okay.
We do have a,
oh, great.
member
Okay, yes.
of the public who
Please
would like to speak.
join us. Okay. Just for the record, if you'll please state your name, and also just as a reminder, the microphone picks up for cats and not in the room.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Tim Hansen. I'm with WS Property Group here in Bloomington. I came here tonight specifically to talk about the stormwater design manual that's on your agenda. So I don't know if this is the appropriate time or during that time on the agenda.
This is a great time.
Okay.
Thank you.
So on last Friday, we had a meeting the mayor did with the department heads of planning, CBU, environmental. Kat was there, and Neil Copper, representative from engineering, to talk about the Title 13 that the city recently adopted. The stormwater design manual is an integral part of that document, and we were there kind of as an informative collaboration. There was, I think, 3 engineering firms represented. 2 developers that I know of were in the room to kind of talk about the implementation of Title 13 and what it might mean for that group and for the city. We learned there that the stormwater manual was going to come tonight in front of you guys for approval, so we knew it existed then, because up until then, I think early on, the development community didn't know about Title 13 until about 8 months ago, and some of us commented on that. I know the engineering firms had an opportunity to comment, and we made some comments on that document, and it listed the stormwater design manual throughout. And so we found out that it did exist on Friday, and so I distributed it to 2 other engineering firms in town, Bynum Faneuil Smith Design Group, and Bledsoe Riggert. And they have that, and there's been a lot of communication this afternoon about those things that are in this document, that drive what's in the Title 13 that's already approved. And it's somewhat unfortunate that I think in order for this title to be enacted today, the day that it was supposed to be enacted, that you guys have to approve this tonight with no input from the development community. This is the first chance we got to see it that I know of, or knew about it on Friday. In talking to the reps from those other companies, they have expressed interest in, one, having a better design forum to review this document, and if it puts you guys in a pinch because you have to approve it to not be out of regulation, because this title has to go into effect, as far as we knew, July 1st of 2024, to at least form a committee that has representatives from those engineering companies, from CBU, engineering department, and environmental department, and 1 or 2 members of this board, just to understand how complex this is and what it's going to do to development in Bloomington, and how it'll affect not only how things are done, if things are done, and what cost that'll come at. Because this document will not make it less expensive to live in Bloomington. And that's all I had to say. I know that some of the engineering firms were going to try to be online to view this. I don't know if they can comment.
Yes, so thank you for your comments. Very much appreciate that. Questions? Yes.
So, Chris, Tim mentioned that this has to be in place today. I mean, I also felt that, I got this and it's a long document and it's, not something that I would necessarily be comfortable moving forward with today. So is that a necessity?
The Title 13 needed to be in place for the July 1 deadline based upon when we had our communications with IDEM. But the design manual itself is not something that has to have that same deadline attached to it. Plus, it will be a living, breathing document that gets to be reviewed and modified over time. But this is your first opportunity to review it. And my understanding is that Elizabeth Carter is going to go through some of the highlights of what this document has for you. But I don't believe you're asking for approval tonight, just for review. It's up to you, is what she's saying.
So I think, Tim, the answer is that we'll have time.
And just one
To
last
do
thing,
it
the
and
other
get
reality
input.
is that there is a current design manual in place. This simply is modifying the existing design manual. So I realize that it's probably more robust, but that's because the Utilities Department has every intention of making the stormwater utility more robust.
Okay, so
Thank you. Other questions for Tim? Thank you for your time. So, yes, Molly?
I know you mentioned that other people might have been joining online, but for feedback. But are you interested in giving feedback other than on the time aspect of it? Like, I'm not sure what your
there-
concerns are with it. So
There's just so much in here from a design perspective. I mean, a lot of the stormwater detention design, pipe design, those parts of it really hasn't changed. There's parts mainly having to do with green infrastructure and types of green infrastructure and different layers of that, and trying to understand how that affects a site, how much room it takes on the site, the expense associated. Will it require you to have more land to do the same thing, or is it just the way to utilize land? That is unknown. And again, all the consultants I talked to have had some time today to look at it, and I've had a lot of comments about it, but nothing that I think could be a back and forth discussion. There's just so much in that's unknown in the document. I know there's some things in there that are kind of hard and fast requirements that are things that I think are hard to achieve. And there's an example, and I can't give it verbatim, and I won't look it up and bore you with it. But it talks about a soil mix, and it says that the soil mix will be 88% sand and 13% something else, and no more than 6% clay, and that'll have a pH between 5.5 and 6.5. I don't even know how to get that material. I think if I had a lab and I had to create 1 square foot of that material, I could do it, given all the right information. I don't think I could import that material onto my site, and that's a requirement that I'd have to meet. But I don't know if it can be done. Those kind of hard and fast things as to how is that going to be judged on site, I think those are difficult to achieve. And I think there's some other things like that I've got comments back from that are hard to achieve. One comment that came back again this afternoon was biofiltration swale or something against your parking area to catch the first flush of runoff. If you're modifying or adding 1,500 square feet of parking, now 1,500 square feet of parking, if you just had a one-way lane of 18 feet and a 16-foot deep parking space, that would be 5 spaces. Now, I don't know why that's in here, because part of the title that deals with your permit is an area consisting of 2,500 square feet or more. And this is stating that 1,500 square feet would be the litmus test for this requirement. But that's a really small area to have then a biofiltration swale, which would be a green feature, added to a parking area. if you were rehabbing an old parking area. So I just think nobody knows how that fits. What's the ramification? Just reading it sounds like a very small area that's going to create a very large disturbance on a rehab site or a repurposed site. So it's little questions like that. And again, it's back and forth. It's not one way or the other, but the way we thought this was happening tonight was, this is the time where we can get it on the Utility Service Board agenda so we could have it passed so we can be compliant. So that was just a concern, that we're going to have something we're going to enact as a title that's already happened, where the guts of the title kind of came after the adoption of the title, and then it'll have to be up to reform to adjust things out, that if these measures aren't achievable, then it's going to, one, have to go through a process of somebody showing that it's unachievable, and then getting on a list to come back to the board to be amended, to go back, whether it's the title that gets amended and has to go through this board and through city council, or if it's just the stormwater manual and just goes to this board for amendment.
Okay.
So it's, yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Would it be possible for the people you're in touch with to send their comments in so that as they're, because it sounds like you guys are still open to revision, right? I mean, even
Yeah, I think all of them would, and they'll,
that would
because
be useful.
and some of it I think though would work from a sending in comments. Some of it I think is a dialogue based, because where the requirement came from and the documents that suggested the requirement, I think on the other side, questions that I got in just discussing some of this today was, some of these are somewhat layered, and will this fit on a typical site? Has anybody tried to do just kind of a typical fit on a usual site to say, can I layer all these things together and make this work, or can't it work? And then there was some questions. There was part of it, and again, it was pulled out. I thought it was out of context, that in some areas where you have a detention requirement, that you'd have to remove 4 feet of the existing soil and put in 4 feet of amended soil, which would be somewhat of a soil mix like I was talking about for a detention facility. I didn't think that was accurate. They thought that's the way they read it. And it's things like that that I think need time to digest. I think everybody's, just concerned that tomorrow, this Title 13 went into effect today. This document's approved today, then everybody's designing by it tomorrow. And there's a lot of things that people don't understand about the document.
Thank you. Other questions for Tim? All right, well, thank you so much for your time and comments this evening, and I'm sure that Liz will have answers to some of your questions this evening, and we'll look forward to hearing more. Thank you. Are there any other petitions and communications? All right, moving on, we have approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any questions, additions, or corrections? And let's see. Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have our approval of the claims, starting with our standard invoices in the amount of $387,660.30. Are there any questions? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have utility bills in the amount of $24,597.85. Are there any questions? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have wire transfers in the amount of $483,949.51. Are there any questions? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have customer refunds in the amount of $2,327.98. Are there any questions? Yes.
Are we working through these
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Can
Amanda.
you repeat that amount again?
Okay,
on what you
I may
had?
have written down incorrectly. I had $2,327.98.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the customer refunds? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Finally, we have a special check run for our bond payments in the amount of $4,651,311.20. Are there any questions? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on with the agenda, we have approval of our consent agenda in the amount of $2,000. James Hall.
Hi, good evening. James Hall, Assistant Director of T&D. I'm pleased to present tonight's consent agenda totaling $2,000. It's a contract with Wessler Engineering to audit our 2023 our water audit. So they're going to audit our water audit. Is there any member who wishes to consider one or more of the items individually? Hearing none, if there is no opposition, these items will be approved as recommended by staff. Hearing no opposition, the consent agenda is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, we have a request for approval of change order number 1 with Kreider & Kreider, Inc. to place 24-inch of shot rock on the existing basin at Winston Thomas. Kevin White.
Yep, Kevin White, Capital Projects Coordinator. Just want to reiterate that this change order does not affect the contract price. It does extend the contract time until December 31st of this year. As part of the original contract, there was an allowance, a sewer basin allowance, that we've deemed not necessary as part of this contract. The material did not end up having to be hauled off site. So, but we also, during the project, we've determined that we need this 24 inches of shot rock to stabilize the soil at the bottom of the sewage basin that we're demoing. And the change order for that is $116,300. And we want to reallocate the money that was used in the sewer basin allowance to cover that money for the shot rock and just be clear and transparent about our uses of that money. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Kevin? Yeah, Molly.
So is there more of the sewage basin allowance that isn't, 'cause that's a big difference, right?
Yes, no,
So
at
will
the end
that
of the-
just remain like?
At the end of the project, if there's no other future change orders, we'd expect to get back $761,906.
Thank you. Any other questions?
What's the intended ultimate use of that area? And is it intended that the shot rock is going to stay there in perpetuity?
Absolutely, yes. No, it is part of the proposed maintenance yard, and storage area would be built upon that area. So
Okay.
that's why we've got a engineering staff on board that will be verifying that the rock and soil is put in and certain lifts, and that it all meets the standards for future use.
So this is the existing old lagoon that sits proximate on the west side of the site, and
Yes, sir.
now we're building further to the west, and that's why we need to do this.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
Any other questions for Kevin? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve request or the change order number 1 with Kreider & Kreider, Inc.? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is our Stormwater Design Manual presentation. Elizabeth Carter.
Good evening. I'm Liz Carter. I'm the MS4 program coordinator. So we were here often over the last year to talk about Title 13, and this is the design manual that accompanies it. I'm presenting it, but there were quite a few folks that helped to design it. In fact, some of the sections I don't have a whole lot of expertise on. So our consultant, Clark Dietz, Sam is here to represent Clark Dietz. They're an engineering firm who has helped us with plan review over the past couple years, and they helped us design this. We also had Jane Fleeg, Phil Peden, Caden Swanson, and Catherine Zager. We all worked as a team to create this. Catherine isn't here, and I don't think Jane is either, but Phil and Caden both are as well. So I have a bunch of engineers to back me up on the parts that I am not an engineer and cannot explain to you. So our background, Title 13 passed City Council in May, and the mayor signed it a week later, and then it took effect today as it was required to by IDEM. Title 13 defers to the Stormwater Design Manual often, and the design manual does not have to be approved by a city council. It's considered an administrative document. Many other departments have such a document. Planning has an administrative manual. Engineering downtown has all kinds of specifications and construction requirements. This is kind of our version of that. I will say we share this manual with other departments. We had very few comments, a couple from our engineering folks. They had some comments about how road construction would be affected by this, but we were able to come to a resolution on their few comments. So I'm going to go section by section. Some I have a bit more to say than other sections, and that's largely because many of the sections are very much unchanged from the document we've been working off of since I think 2008. Is that when the last one was passed through? Yeah, so the requirements haven't changed much in many of the sections, so I'll be like more in depth on the ones that we have changed. So section 1 is an introduction, how to interpret conflicts between this document and ordinances. And then there's a whole bunch of references that are very helpful, a lot of them reference to the state, for example. Section 2 is fairly long, and it does have quite a bit in it. So first is our lid statement, which had originally been a chapter in the ordinance, you may remember, but it was really just a statement that we preferred certain kind of development for stormwater and not really any kind of regulation. So we removed it from the ordinance and we put it in here instead. The next section is about pre-submittals. So it talks about our preference that if folks have a large project that they have that has a lot of components to it, that they set a meeting with us so that we can talk through it and they can understand what it is we're looking for. This section also talks about when someone could get a variance or waiver from the standards of this manual. So anything in this manual, you can get a waiver from that. Anything in the ordinance cannot be waived unless the ordinance specifies it because it's law. This, though, provides for any standard to be deviated from, and we'll go over the process for that later. Because those deviations, it's our recommendation that they come to this board, so it's not staff making a decision, it would be you guys. We then go into permits, which of course are new. We talk about the different kinds of submittals that are required. I have an extra manual if anybody would like. No, yes, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now,
Oh, well, yes, yeah. Thank you.
So we have different kinds of submittals depending on the size of the project because our stormwater ordinance now applies to everything that's 2,500 square feet of disturbance or more. Whereas in the past, up until today, we were only involved when it was an acre or more. So the requirements for submittals, if you're under an acre, are much less than that if you're over an acre. That's because a lot of the requirements for over an acre are set by the state, but where we can loosen those requirements for what's submitted, we have. Also, please feel free to stop me at any point with a question. Okay. We then talk about water quantity requirements. So that's where we give release rates, and we talk about detention in lieu, where if a detention requirement can't be met, a fund can be paid into or other infrastructure could be installed. So this is kind of the first time we see if you can't meet this requirement, here's your out. We also talk about water quality. When we brought this ordinance forward, we had always said that we plan to have a green infrastructure requirement and a pay in lieu if someone can't meet that requirement. very much modeled after the affordable housing pay in lieu that planning has. And I think when we came with the ordinance the last time or two, we said that we had set the requirement at 50% of water quality needed to be treated by green infrastructure. I believe that is also what we told council. So when they passed the ordinance, that was their expectation. That's what this manual says.
So, sorry, just
Go
a
ahead.
quick. So, when we say in lieu fee, like if they're not able to do it, like I could understand maybe like affordable housing, they could make it they choose not to, but some are, along with maybe Tim's comment, are there going to be some sites that it's not feasible
Sure.
to do some of these things, or like it's the cheaper option just to pay the fee?
So we don't provide for the cheaper option is to pay the fee. You have to demonstrate that it is not feasible
Okay.
for you to treat 50% of your water quality, which if you'll remember back to many months ago, the water quality that's required to be treated is the first inch of rain. So that first inch of water, 50% of it has to go through green infrastructure before it continues onto our storm system. And we have a whole green infrastructure chapter that I'll get to here in a little bit, but one of those things could be, it could be rain gardens, it could be a green roof. There are a ton of really unique ways that people can incorporate green infrastructure. And it's been a focus of the city and this administration in the past. So we have added that focus to the private sector. I will say many sites incorporate a bunch of green infrastructure anyway. That's just how they meet their detention and water quality requirements, because it tends to be less expensive than doing all of this with gray or mechanical infrastructure.
Thank you.
Of course. There's also a statement that a treatment train is required. That just means that you have to have more than one BMP to handle stormwater, so that if one is to fail, then you just aren't completely out of luck. So what that looks like often is you'll have a parking lot with runoff. That water will filter through bioretention either within or near the parking lot before it heads to the detention pond, for example. So you have multiple treatment steps along the way, so that if one isn't being maintained very well, you don't just completely lose water quality. The next section is the stormwater permit. This is new with Title 13, and it goes into very detailed sections about what we expect to be submitted for this permit. I will say, this is not different from what we expect to be submitted right now for plan review. What we have done is gone into greater detail so that we can be clear, because what we're running into right now is folks submit things for plan review and we say, you're missing this is incomplete, and we have to send it back, and then they have to submit again. The more clear we can be up front, the better the submissions we expect to get, and that will cut down on everybody's time. And that includes the GIS data, which is when folks are ready to get building on their project, we expect them to submit GIS layers to us so that we can upload it into our GIS so we can see where all of their infrastructure is going to be. So we've had some trouble with people sending us files we couldn't really use in the past. So like, for example, we're just clarifying what files we will accept so that folks know what to send us. They don't have to reformat GIS data. If you have further questions on GIS stuff, I'm not your person, but I understand that much. We also go into more detail about closeout. Again, this is one of those things that's kind of like a question mark for contractors. All they know is they ask for final occupancy from planning, and then planning calls me, and at some point I show up and look for stabilization. So we've given very clear expectations for what closeout looks like. Again, really nothing is different from how we practice now, with the one exception of we expect to have a O&M meeting. So we currently have a pre-construction meeting before a project gets started. We want to kind of have a post-construction meeting so that whomever is responsible for maintaining this infrastructure in perpetuity, we can let them know what the expectation is. That expectation is in a document that is people already have to provide it, they have to follow it, but we just want to go over it with them so they know what the expectation is when we show up 5 years later to do an inspection, make sure it's still working. They knew what they're supposed to be doing. It wasn't just a document recorded with the deed that they never saw. So we want to make sure we have more time to go over those things, because from project start to finish, it could be many years. Folks forgot what we talked about at the pre-construction meeting. This is when we get into the very heavy engineering stuff. So if you have questions, Phil and Sam and Caden are here. So chapter 3 is about hydrology. This is runoff rates and volumes. I don't believe there was much of any change from the stormwater design manual we were using in the past. If you have any questions about all the calculations, these gentlemen are here. Hydraulics, again, this hasn't changed much at all. It's about the storm sewer design requirements that we have for both public and private. Talks about what kind of capacity different infrastructure has to have, how it has to be spaced, and it goes into specifics for inlets, culverts, swales, and there is like a requirement for separation from sanitary sewer. So this is very like kind of in the nitty-gritty of construction portion of this. Okay, chapter 5 is detention requirements, and it gives design requirements based on the type of facility. So you see wet bottom basins, dry bottom basins, stormwater wetlands. I'll be honest, dry bottom facilities are most of what we see in the city, and then parking lot storage. And this is just how they're required to detain. So this is the quantity portion of stormwater, and then the next chapter is the quality. Stormwater quality. So we give a list of green infrastructure. So we list all the different kinds of green infrastructure facilities that we expect to see. There's also kind of a note at the end, if you have anything that doesn't fit into one of these categories that you'd like to present, we're always open to that too. So we give specific design criteria for the different types of infrastructure. These design criteria, again, were in the manual from 2008. We've updated some items of it, but we really haven't changed anything substantially. So these design criteria have existed for quite a while. We've also added green roofs to the stormwater quality option that didn't exist in the 2008 manual. Probably weren't seeing a lot of green roofs back then. And Sam and his team did a bunch of research and found us some really good guidance on how to build a green roof. Then we have appendices. The first is abbreviations, definitions. It'll look very similar to the ones that were listed in the ordinance, if not identical. Appendix B, we're still working on, so we will certainly be coming back regardless to you guys to have you look at this appendix. We contracted to have a bunch of green infrastructure details drawn up. So this is just kind of like standard drawings that show different kinds of green infrastructure so that designers have a jumping off point. If they've never designed a bioswale before, here's an example of one that you can totally copy and then sort of modify it to fit your site. The list of these details is very long. I think there's like 85 pages of them. And that's, we've been working with our engineering department downtown to work through them and make sure everyone's happy with them before we publish them. And then Appendix C is a preferred plant species list. One of the real challenges we see is engineers design these plans and they don't know a lot about landscaping. So we gave them kind of a handy list of plants that we see in green infrastructure all the time and a lot of information about how they would best be applied. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions, and so are my colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you to you for your time, for working on this, and for your team of folks that worked on this. I know you've spent a significant amount of time on it, and we appreciate that. So we'll just start down here.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation and for doing all this. This handout that we got,
That's the next one. That's the next item on the
Okay.
agenda. Okay.
Okay. Nothing. Anybody down? Yes, Amanda.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate and make sure I understood what you were saying. Chapters 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 were already pre-existing.
Yes, I mean, parts of 2 were too, but we've made some edits. Okay, I think chapters 1 and 2 are largely new, but I think 3, 4, 5, and 6 all existed, and we've like tweaked them.
Okay.
Like I said, for water quality, we had a green roof. So there was no section for that before.
So in terms of developers and engineers, those sections that are very detailed in terms of the calculations that are used and whatnot.
So like the soil.
The soil.
The soil requirement has been there for years.
has been there.
The same one?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. That's what I wanted to clarify that.
At least as long as Catherine was MS4, had my position, and since I've been here, so that's the past 4 years, I think, that amended soil requirement has not changed.
Okay. But the difference now is that so were those requirements or those were suggestions before?
I think the old manual, and Phil knows it better than I do, I think the old manual has an amended soil requirement in it. I think we would have certainly accepted the mix that was in there. We had a preferred one. And I think the one in the manual the old manual was harder to hit than what Catherine has a background in stormwater and landscaping and stuff. She had found like kind of a looser requirement that she let people meet, but what was in the old manual was actually more stringent than the loosened version she gave folks. But that requirement has been there for quite some time.
Thank you. Those are my
course.
questions.
Any other questions?
Yeah. I have to leave in 20 minutes. Questions. And yeah, I only got through about halfway through chapter 5, to be honest. But, all right. So page 8, section 223. I just want to understand, so no stormwater management permit is needed in this table 2.1 for underground utilities, but they are required for above ground. So are we talking about underground utilities that cause no soil disturbance to be installed, like some kind of tunneling mechanism or something?
Correct. So
okay.
when you see directional boring, for example, they might have disturbed land, but you didn't see it. It happened underground. So telling someone you have to install a detention pond, it doesn't make any sense in that case.
Got that. Page 10. Page 10. Oh, yeah. So this table 2.4.
Yes.
CCI, is that meant to be the CPI? Is that?
Caden says yes.
Okay, all right, so we need to change that.
So we need to edit that.
Geospatial data submittal, the template is not on the website yet that is mentioned.
Which page are you on? I'm so sorry.
It's page 14. So I just went to look because that's kind of my thing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it's not there.
I think they've waited for this to go live, like to be adopted before they put it on the webpage so that people don't come across it and say, what is this?
Okay.
But our GIS team did work to make sure there is a
Everything
template.
else is there, so.
Okay.
Anyway, so then you scroll down to the next page, section 248 at the bottom. So you can use GPS, that's fine. I mean, it's not the technically correct term anymore, but we'll ignore that. But sub-meter or better, you really need to specify that you're talking about horizontal.
Okay.
Because for some of these, I imagine some of this data that's going to be submitted for a system, for a water system would have a vertical component as well.
Yes.
So I would just caution you there. However, Laura Haley and Chuck Winkle and others want to phrase that, but they should take a look at that and have some input, I think. On page 17, it talks about the log, the maintenance log. It seems like we would really want a person's name to be associated with every entry, and that's not mentioned.
Okay.
Like the name of the inspector. So there's some ownership of the person who writes that in the logbook?
Are you looking at the bullet that says the owner shall keep an updated logbook? Is that the section you're looking at?
Yeah, it just doesn't say anything about, it's got a bunch of columns, headings
Yes,
essentially,
yes.
but there's no one that says inspector name.
Okay, so you are looking for the staff inspector, or were you looking for who was doing the maintenance logs on behalf of the owner?
On the behalf of the owner.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I would, if we want them to have accountability, I would think we would want them to be able to put a person's name in that logbook.
And I would say at the end of the day, it's the owner's responsibility, right, to keep this up. But if they would like to know who from their staff or who that they hired had done this maintenance, then that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, for us, that responsibility falls with the property owner.
Okay, that's one way to look at it. And then they talk about 1.5, so there's a bullet above that, the 1.5 inches, and I ask about this, where we're gonna get the data, and it says no, so that's great, and it's the no rain gauges. There's 2 in city limits from what I could see, and there's 1 north of town, 1 east of town.
Okay.
Go to the NOAA site. Are we just talking about using one of those or both of those, or how do people know which one to use? Or are we just assuming they'd be over a 24-hour period that they'd be very similar?
I think we assume over a 24-hour period they'd be very similar, but that is, as we are tracking rain data internally, we're finding that that's not always the case. So I think if whichever one was closer to them, they could use that if they weren't tracking rain themselves.
To be on the same page, we might want to say that,
Okay.
whichever is closest to the site, because that way that's not ambiguous, and,
Sure.
and you guys can't use one and they pick the other type of thing.
Absolutely.
So, and then the numbering restarts for chapter 3.
Yes.
So we need to fix that because that's
The
a little
page
confusing.
numbering got off, Sam, on chapter 3. It like restarted strangely.
Then chapter 3, page 8, 331. What's going on there? 331. 3. I'm sorry, scrolling in this is really hard for such a long document. Okay, so it talks about upstream runoff coming into a detention pond, and you can route it outside the detention pond, or you can bring it into your detention pond. If you bring it into your detention pond, you have to have a separate outlet. That's what it says. So that's all correct?
I believe so. Phil? Yes? Yes.
Okay. And then later on the next paragraph, it says, additional detention may be required additional detention may be required if the proportion of the upstream area to the downstream is more than 5 to 1, something like that. But if this would be only if you're routing it into your basin.
I think it's a question for Phil or Sam or Kaden.
It was just that, to me, this lacked some, a general, like a general approach.
Sure.
So for me to understand what's going on
Sure.
here.
Sure. I know what the intent is, but I would like one of the engineers to speak to the
Yeah.
actual verbiage.
And I got a related question.
Yeah, Phil Peden, engineering, for the record. So I think when we've seen these in the past, and if I understand correctly, that a lot of that verbiage for those the offsite flow into the detention area is old verbiage from the old design manual, but we typically don't see it. So what happens is, and not to say that we don't want to correct it, if you have a suggestion, but we don't see a lot of it being routed through the pond because that pond is for water quality as well. And so if you take all 20 acres off-site through a 5-acre site that's trying to detain for their 5-acre site, you're going to get that pond's going to fill up really quickly, and then you can't use it for water quality as easily. It's going to suspend all those, resuspend the solids. It's going to disrupt all what you're trying to do with water quality and the native plants and all that, and the filtrations, amended soils. So most of the time that's all routed around. But if you're going to route it through, you would have to have an outlet control structure that could not only detain what you need to detain for your on-site, but allow those larger flows to release.
Yeah. So if you have a conveyance coming down through your site, it's coming from an upstream source, you'd put your detention basins just above on a tributary, so that goes through your site, but you're capturing something just upstream and still capturing most of your site.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. I understand now. And then in 332, it talks about a downstream conveyance may need to be altered if your development, if that downstream conveyance is inadequate to carry the flow from the developed state. What if it's inadequate before you even build it, is my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we review, regardless of storm sewer, if it's sanitary sewer, we look at capacity downstream. And so if we find something that's inadequate downstream, then we're going to try to get that corrected with the development, especially if they take flow that might have sheet drained off of different parts of that drainage basin into certain areas along a roadway or across another property, and they concentrate all that to one outlet, which is what happens when you put a detention pond in. All that water from any impervious surface has to go through the detention area, and then it's concentrated at one discharge point. And so you impacted it, the downstream, to a more level, even if that entire drainage area didn't change. It still impacts that receiving system more in post-construction. So we would want to make sure that they could receive that flow from the detention pond on down without causing an issue.
And what if it's on someone else's property?
Yeah, generally that's not the case, but in that case, then it would, most of the time we're going to see that there's a stormwater drainage easement in that location, and they would have the authority to go in and make some upgrades there based on the easement.
I see. So you could have an adjacent property owner invest in something downstream and have the legal right to do that if you so directed them?
If there was an easement,
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I understand now. Do we currently have any stormwater lift stations in Bloomington? It talks about them on page 13.
We do have one at the 3rd Street underpass. So where you pass under the Beeline Trail, there's one storm lift station at that point. Public.
Oh, where that really low place is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Okay.
Very uncommon.
Yeah,
But
one place. Yeah, I remember that issue. Page 23. Let's see here.
Page 23, are you on to chapter 4?
I am into chapter 5 on page 23.
Okay.
2311. Debris and trash removal and other necessary maintenance shall be performed on a regular basis to assure continued operation in conformance to design. That's pretty ambiguous, a regular basis.
I mean, that's fair. So I think the assumption is that, most folks go out and they do maintenance on their property. They mow grass, they do that kind of stuff. If you observe that there's trash in your detention facility, that would be the time to remove it. But at the very least, when maintenance and inspection reports are conducted that are required through the O&M, almost every maintenance log I've ever seen has a question of was there any trash that needed to be removed? So at a minimum, as often as you're doing those maintenance reports.
And what is that frequency?
I think the maintenance reports are quarterly typically. That's what we normally see.
Okay.
Honestly, this is something they proposed to us during plan review. We're not dictating you must go maintain your pond every 2 weeks or every month or however often. And it will vary based on the facility, right? If you have a couple rain gardens in a parking lot after you've installed them and they've been there for a couple years, you may not need to check on them very often. So depending, we see them proposed by the designers, and if we think that frequency is inadequate, we'll mention it to them.
Okay. And then they talk about interesting. I mean, these different ledges they talk about below and above the pond. It's kind of an interesting concept. It makes sense. What I didn't understand is the safety ramp, how that's identified. How would anyone know that this safety ramp is there? Is there a handrail? Is there a marker? If you want to get out of the pond or otherwise get in the pond, how do you know where that is?
We don't want you getting in the pond. We want you to be able to get out, though. But that's a great question for Phil.
Yeah, so what Board Member Eamon's referring to is the wet bottom retention ponds that hold water, and then there's a safety ledge in there so that you can, if you enter, then you can find a way out, because it's common that a certain amount of storage needs to be obtained on site for detention or stormwater quality. And so if they were to build vertical walls within there and meet that requirement with a smaller space, it would be unsafe. You would fall in and not have any way out. So some people end up in there and didn't intend on ending up in there. And so we put some parameters in to protect the safety of vehicular traffic, in fact, because sometimes cars go off the road or just pedestrians walking. So as far as the ramp and how that's noted, I would have thought that the slope would change along the perimeter to where you would see a different location. But I don't think there's any marker other than recognize the slope, unless there was I don't recall if it says gravel or, but you'd have usually a steeper, a slope, one slope around the edge, but then for access in and out, I would think that would change to more of a road transportation type slope, not greater than 8%. Is my guess. I don't think that's probably all detailed in the.
We don't have these in the detention ponds currently.
Not that I'm aware of.
Is the 6-foot depth minimum that it talks about, is that something we have in place currently?
Is that what's the?
Here, let me find you where he's at. Could you tell us what page you're on?
Oh, now
think it's
I'm
on the-
down
I will
in 23, 24. I remember seeing something about 6 feet deep.
If
Did
it
anyone
helps,
else see that?
I think this got revised in 2008, right after I started, because it was just in draft
Number
form.
3?
In there, a
That-
maintenance ledge.
That's the maintenance ledge width. Maybe I just glanced over that and was thinking depth. No, it's number 1, minimum depth of 6 feet. There it is. Is that in place right now, or don't we have ponds a lot shallower than that?
I think that there's probably ponds that could be deeper than that. So this was revised in 2008, and so I came in and it was in draft format. And I came from Indianapolis for a few years up there, and so they have a lot of wet bottom detention ponds, and you were hearing about accidents from folks that were falling in those or driving off into those. So I made corrections to this, try to make it safer. And so I think that was probably a revision since then. And I will say, I don't think we've had any ponds proposed since that period. I don't think there's been one that we've reviewed within city limits that is wet bottom. I just think.
I know we have them that are less than 6 feet deep. This is saying they have a minimum depth of 6 feet. I'm just.
Yeah, it used to be a minimum depth of 3 feet, because that would, if you go less than that, then the sunlight will hit the bottom of the pond and create a lot of aquatic and plants, and then that was something that was tried to prevent, I guess, at some point. So we may need to check that 6 feet. Not sure where what you got there, Sam?
Right, I don't remember if we changed that number. Maybe you recall what the minimum depth was before, but it's to support aquatic life and allow for a little bit of sediment over the years in the pond. It's pretty standard to have a minimum depth on detention ponds, and we looked at that number. I don't know if it was 4 before or 6, but yeah, I think we said 6. But yeah, we can definitely take a look at it and review these comments.
Just curious. Thank you for entertaining those questions.
Yes. Thank you for investigating and writing those questions down. Sure. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, please, David. Oh, it's on.
Of course. It's my first question. You mentioned that there's a waiver or a variance process from any of the standards in the design manual. Is that purely administrative, or who makes that decision?
Great question. So we will get to the fee table here in a little bit. So first of all, we have a fee for requesting waivers, just like planning does. And any waiver from the standards in this manual would come to this board.
To the board,
So,
okay.
and that was our intent. We need to talk through you guys, through with you all about process, because we don't want your meetings to suddenly be 3 hours long. But the idea would be that any petitioner, any person who'd submitted plans and said, I can't meet this design standard either because of engineering, site constraints, or for the public good. Because sometimes, you know, if there's a road or a trail being built, they can't meet something in here, but the public good of we want to have pedestrian facilities outweighs, you know, what's in here. We would have the petitioner come to you all, tell you, you know, why they would like to vary from our standards, and then our staff would give you a recommendation. In the past, our variances were sort of just at staff level, but we'd like to be more transparent with you guys in the future.
And will we have criteria then, or findings to work off of, or just sort of rational judgment, or?
I think it would depend how large of a variance it is. So like if, for example, somebody wanted to build a bioretention facility that was a little bit steeper in slope than what we required here, I don't know that we'd have like a whole report of findings for that. If somebody wanted to just not meet their release rates for detention, Phil, Kaden, they might have more findings for you. I think it would really depend what measure they were looking to get a variance from.
Okay. And you mentioned that the manual does not require council approval.
Correct.
Does it require this board's approval?
Yes.
It does. Oh, so
Yes.
as it evolves
Yes,
down the
and
road
that's
as
why
a
this
living
is just
document?
a first look at it, and Sam is over here taking notes of what you guys say, so that when we come back, we should have addressed everything.
Okay. And then final, so as the public process for this, you know, it's a very technical manual, so you probably don't, there's not going to be a great deal of public interest in what it says, but with regards to Mr. Hansen's comments, was there any engagement of the local development community as this was put together?
It's a great question. So just like every other administrative document I've seen passed in every department I've worked at the city, we did not engage the public because it was technical. We would be happy to, I've had some inquiries from a couple of local engineering firms. I'd be happy to have them look at it. I do think though, like a lot of what's in here is too technical to just put on the website and have the general public review it. But we are certainly open to this board's thoughts on that.
Would you be willing to have kind of the roundtable discussion maybe with a handful of folks from the development community?
I believe we actually are already slotted to have such a good discussion on July 17th.
Oh.
The Bloomington Economic Development Council is holding, just for you all, a kind of a stormwater ordinance symposium. My counterpart for the county, Kelsey Thatonia, who you all remember, I'm sure, and our the MS4 coordinator from Ellettsville are all being asked to a 3-hour symposium about stormwater ordinances and items like this. So I think we will be having that very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Regarding like the technical nature of the document, my thought is it's better to make more information available even if some people can't understand it. Is there a reason, is there a negative or, you know, what's the downside of putting it on there even if the majority of people can't or won't look at it?
Sure. I don't know that there is one. I think in terms of our process, you know, we had this reviewed internally first, other city departments, and then we had you guys have a first look at it. This is kind of the exact same process we followed for the ordinance. So I think we're early enough in the process. We're open to whatever you guys would like us to do. So yeah, this was, we received this draft Wednesday of last week. So, and that was in reflection of other city department comments. And then the next step was to have you guys take a first look and make sure there's nothing in here that you thought they are way off base. They need to completely redo this. So like I said, just like the ordinance, we came here as one of our first steps.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
So, like regarding the timeline issue, it seems that's more of a misunderstanding about where we are in the process?
Correct.
Okay.
I will say, I know they had a meeting on Friday, some of the local developers and engineers. I had a couple comments, a couple questions from engineers, and I had told them I'll be happy to share this draft with you, but we'd like the board to look at it first, so I'll be able to share it with you on Tuesday.
Okay.
So that's, that was our timeline, brief timeline.
Thank you.
Amanda?
Just a point of clarification, our Frank, the PDF and whatnot that you put together for us for the board meeting, that's not made public. It's just simply the agenda that's made public.
Packets public.
So
It's
really, anybody that goes to see the agenda for the evening would have had access to this draft because it was part of our packet.
Correct.
Right.
So,
And you guys did receive it, I hope, a couple days before
We
the packet
do.
went out because we did realize it was such a large document.
Yeah.
Like I said, Sam's team has been working so diligently to make all of the changes we've requested. We got it on Wednesday, and I think it either turned over to you that same day or on Thursday. So apologies about the short timeline. We just wanted to get your thoughts as soon as possible and not push this 2 weeks out, and then, the whole thing is delayed.
well, and then a follow-up question on that too is, so what is your deadline? Or like ideally, when
Sure.
do you need all of our input and a final draft to the board for review?
Honestly, if comments are readily available, we would bring another draft at the next meeting. As soon as possible, but as I said earlier, we have a stormwater design manual that we've been operating off of for many years. We would like to be going off of a better, improved one, but we have one in place. So it's not like breaking our new process with Title 13 taking effect. If this isn't adopted we have time to slow down and make it right, make it as good as possible. So please don't feel pressured. And as I believe Chris had said earlier, it's a living, breathing document. We have an appendix that's not even in here yet, and we don't expect to bring to you for at least a few months. So as time goes on and we have more items to add or more appendices, we will be back.
Okay, so as soon as possible, I go through with my editing pen.
Yes.
When do you want these by?
Ideally, I would like edits of this back in a week if that's possible.
Right.
If it's
So
not,
so any other comments, questions from the board submitted to you by Monday?
yes.
Thank you.
How about input from developers? When would you want that by?
Sure. Well, if you all feel that this is ready to put on a website and share, we will put it on the website tomorrow. I'll tell you, I don't have the email for every developer in town. We've been sharing items with engineering firms because there's 3 major ones in town. It's pretty easy to do. But I would be happy to send this on to the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce when we put it up on the website, and they could have a week or two. I will say most of the comments we will get will probably be from the engineering firms, though.
Obviously, Tim has access to a lot of the major folks, so he's sitting there, and if you could let him know when you would like some input.
Sure. Like I said, we want to get through you guys first to make sure we're not putting out something that you're in disagreement with, and then I would be happy to share it and see what a deadline looks like for the development community. Yes.
And again, you don't have to post anything new to the website. You can direct people to the draft that was presented at the board meeting.
Right.
That's public. That is public record.
Right. Right. I think when with Title 13, for example, we brought a bunch of drafts to this board. Most people didn't know to look there, and before we started advertising, please look at this title and give us input, because we didn't want to kind of scare anyone with the earlier drafts of things that were going to get revised. So before we put it on our website and say, please look at this and give us feedback, we wanted to make sure it was in a clean enough form. So kind of the same idea here. But yes, we could just point to this, as you said.
Just so I understand, you would like our board feedback within a week so that you could come back at the next meeting on the 15th. And then at that time, would you be looking for approval from the board and then posting it online to solicit feedback from engineers, community engineers? Or do we want to have that feedback first before we approve it here?
That's up to you guys.
I guess I'm asking you, what was your thinking on that?
Okay.
Yeah.
My thinking was, I think that we could be getting feedback from the board and feedback from engineering firms simultaneously.
Okay, yes.
I have a feeling the feedback might be a little bit different, right?
Sure.
The engineers might be digging into the calculations and finding a typo there that I would certainly never find. So I think we're happy to do that simultaneously. I just, like I said, didn't want to put it on the website until at least
Right.
you guys had.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Seth?
So you're having the round
meeting or the roundtable meeting on the 17th?
Yes.
Do you anticipate feedback through that? That could be,
So that was billed more as, and I know I wasn't at the meeting that Kat and David and I think Neil were at on Friday morning. I believe they did receive feedback then. The idea of the roundtable meeting is, I think, more to educate, but if this hadn't been adopted yet, which I doubt it will be adopted 2 weeks from today, based on the comments we've received, we could still take feedback on the 17th. But I do think it's more supposed to be informational. I can't entirely tell. It's set up. It's not, something the city's putting on. So.
So I think then at this time, we'd like to solicit feedback from the board
Sure.
and the community, and then also on the 16th at your roundtable, and then possibly on 30th.
Yes. But if you would like us to come back in 2 weeks,
Sure.
if there's any questions, again, I know this is a large document.
Yes.
And that you haven't had the most time with it. So if you'd like for us to come back 2 weeks from now to discuss anything further, of course, our staff would be happy to do so.
Right. Okay.
I don't want it to just be like we have one conversation and then we come back
Yes.
a month later and expect you to adopt it for
Right.
something this large.
Well, and I do, sorry, I didn't.
Yes, and I see we'll have public comments again at the end of the meeting. I saw something pop up on the screen. So, yes.
Well, and I would just like to say that if you're just getting things from us that are just for, the page numbering or typos or things like that, I mean, you don't have to bring that to us. But if there's something that's major that's brought up, whether it's by, like, for example, with what Board Member Eamon brought up, there were some very specific questions that we've got, that if there are things like that I do feel it's important for the board to hear,
Yeah.
to clarify. But otherwise,
Sure.
if you get either no feedback from us or minimal feedback from us, great.
Yeah.
And whenever it's shared, however this is shared publicly,
Yes.
can we share it side by side? Can you also post the previous draft, the one that is current now, enacted, 2008, so that people can see, yes, this was part of the ordinance. Now, a clarifying question, have we been enforcing what's in there? And is that why this seems more like of a big shock? Because maybe that soil, isn't what we've been doing, and then, because even though it was there, and then we've not been doing it.
Right.
So now we're gonna do it, and where do you get that soil?
So that's a fantastic question. So as you guys know, the MS4, my position didn't exist until 2018, 2019. So the focus on stormwater was much less. The manual was there. Did we have the staff and the time and the commitment to go through it and make sure every development we saw met it? No, we didn't. So, when I first got this position, I read through it very carefully. And when I did plan review, I kept referencing it, and it was a bit of a shock to folks. And that is why we're trying to be very clear. But it was definitely used. Not used as much as it could have been in the past.
And then my final question, so let's say, July 30th, we've solicited all the feedback, you've come back in 2 weeks, and then by the 30th, we've got a final draft, we approve it. Then is that enacted like with developers or engineers on, July 31st, you're following this updated plan? Or would we date that to give people an opportunity to be like, okay, here it's coming, and then?
Fantastic question. So I think it would go into effect the day it was enacted would be my preference. I've already had questions from engineering firms about, hey, this project that we are planning, you've sort of seen it, but we haven't officially submitted it. Which version of your ordinance does it have to follow? And that is honestly just kind of like a thing that we have to, there are going to be some weird in the middle projects. And I think we're erring on the side of, you can follow the old ordinance if we've already seen this. So, we're not going to say you've already put a bunch of time and money into designing this, but sorry, you have to follow this new thing. So, and that's a conversation I've already started having with engineers, and I think it's gone fine. I think the manual will be the same way, whether you have it take effect the day that you vote for it or you push it out 2 weeks or a month. I think that just having it take effect as soon as possible is great, but if the board has other thoughts, we're open to it.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
I just wanted to comment that I'd be more comfortable voting on this if input from the developers and the engineers were there before we voted on it.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that everyone has sufficient time.
Yes, and that's why if Liz is ready for presentation or updates next time, but I would not expect a vote at the earliest would be the 30th. Maybe
We were
additional
gonna
draft, and then we would
approve
have the
it
time.
And then, like, that doesn't make sense to me. Can you remind me the timeline?
Oh, I mean, so the timeline is really like, this doesn't have to be enacted today, right? I mean, it can, because we have an existing manual, this can be enacted whenever you all are comfortable with it. But I think the earliest possible it would be 2 meetings from now, because I'm happy to share this publicly starting tomorrow.
So we're gonna get feedback before we vote on
Yes.
it.
Yes.
In like an updated draft that then we
Yes.
could review. And
So
then
it's
a
not
final.
gonna be like we approve it and then more stuff is coming in.
I mean, that's always an option too, but I could see why it would have its
But that's not the
drawbacks.
plan.
Yes, no, it's not the plan.
Any?
I just have a comment. You made the comment earlier about that, the city, that we have many, many different ordinance or manuals that the public
Yes.
does not have input in.
That's correct.
And I believe there's ones that, they probably don't need to, but I do believe that this is an important manual for our engineers or developers to provide input for us, because if there's nothing worse than making something put something in writing that looks great on black and white and sounds great with calculations, but if in the end we can't do it, or we either can't implement it one way or the other, or you can't monitor one way or the other, then all this is a layer of red tape. I was trying to think of a nice word to use. This is just a layer of red tape that will discourage developers from creating businesses here, for creating housing here, for building this community. And I don't think anyone wants to see our community become stagnant. So I do think that there is a really great opportunity to show where our city group, a board of our public ratepayers for the CBU, and other stakeholders have a little input in it. So I appreciate that you said that, and I appreciate that you are open to having those conversations and have already had some.
Yes, absolutely.
Any other questions or comments for Liz?
So I think to sum it up, great job, by the way. Thank you for everything. So where we're at is our comments, the board's comments, can be taken between now and next week, and this is a living document, so at any time. But I think it's important that we encourage all people of interest to look at today's agenda, because the manual is in there, and they can direct questions to you as well.
Correct. Yeah, Catherine is out. I think to myself and Mr. Peden would probably be one or the other of us can probably answer any question, I think.
And also on the 17th, there'll be that roundtable meeting. Yes. So any other people of interest that aren't able to view this before then can attend that as well.
Yes, and I think that BEDC will start advertising that meeting very, very soon. They're trying to get us to confirm who all is going to be there, like, now. So I think you'll see more about that very soon.
So there's plenty of opportunity to get your questions answered, or
Yes.
at least addressed.
Yes,
Thank you.
of course.
Thank you. Thank you for your time with this. We'll
course.
look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks for this. Yeah. But moving on with the agenda. Okay, we have a request for approval of revisions. Yes, I'm sorry. Request of approval of revisions to Title 13 rules and regulations. Liz Carter.
I think poor Frank was a little confused by what I told him, and that
Okay,
was not
sorry.
helpful. So we're not amending Title 13. That It's too new to amend. So what we're doing is there's the rules and regulations document that is one of those, administrative documents that accompanies our ordinances here at CBU. And it does have a chapter on stormwater that is 2.5 pages long. And anything that was listed in that chapter has been replaced by what's in the ordinance. So in the past, the rules and regs serves to sort of bolster portions of ordinance that aren't very robust. Title 13 is pretty robust. So we don't necessarily need some of the text that was in there. So what we're asking to do is to remove section 26 of the rules and regs document and replace it with, if I can find which tab I'm sharing, with a new section which is what is in front of you. So because we don't need to add a whole lot, a design manual is certainly one thing, but since we don't need to add a lot of rules, since the ordinance covered most of them, all we're seeking to add right now is stormwater fees. So we had talked about, when we talked about permits, we talked about having fees. And I also have a table that accompanies this that helps to understand how we calculated out all the permit fees, and I'm happy to go through that as well. But essentially, when we went to City Council, some language got added to our ordinance saying that we would charge fees that were consistent with recouping staff time, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what my next table is for. The fees that aren't exactly calculated out, I have mostly looked at Tippecanoe County, so home to Lafayette, West Lafayette, for the fees that they enacted in 2018. So I kind of used them as a model, so just for that. So the idea behind this table is once we have a permit, there will be fees that are associated with that permit. The base fee for a permit is listed here. It's based on land disturbance. We thought that was the easiest way to correlate staff time that's spent on plan review, permit review, and how much time it is kind of correlates to the land disturbance. Not exactly. Some projects are small but extremely complicated. Some are large and not terribly complicated. But for the most part, the larger the project, the more staff time it takes. So those are the first section here. Is based on that, and I can share the next tab. So this is my table I put together. Sorry if it's confusing. So these are the positions that are involved in plan review, permit review. Most directly, there are certainly other support roles. So our finance team would have to take in payment and have to manage bonds, but that's kind of that's very core to their role, so I didn't include them. So these are the folks who have the most interaction with plan review, specifically with stormwater. These are their pay rates. They are the exact pay rates of the individuals who conduct this review. So that's your first column or your second column after the position title. After the pay rate is a percentage of time they spend on storm. So for example, our land acquisition person is the easement person. They look at all 3 easements. So the question was, of this time that you spend doing plan review, what percentage of it is dedicated to storm? So that's where your fractions are. Oh no, sorry, there's a little comment in the corner. Okay, sorry. So that's the percentage of time they spend focused on storm, because this fee is only for storm. Go ahead.
95% or 0.95%?
Oh, sorry. It's all out of 1. 1 is 100. So that's why it's 1, 1.2, 0.3. So it's 95%.
Okay.
Sorry. I can format this more nicely if you guys would like. And then I asked our staff to estimate the time they spend on, and we looked at specific projects that have been reviewed in the last couple of years. So on average, and so what this covers is if a plan review is conducted between all of the startup, the conversations that have to be had with engineers, that kind of thing, 3 rounds of review. So we get plans, we review them, we create comments, they go back to the engineer, and we go through that process 3 times total. And then the release of the pre-construction meeting that we have, the release of the permit, all that kind of stuff. How much time would you spend if the project was only 3 reviews on projects this size? So that's where you see the hours as we go across. Then we've multiplied out the rate times the percentage of that rate, their pay rate that is dedicated to storm, times the amount of hours they would need for a project that size. And that is where we've come up with our estimated costs along the bottom column. You can't see them all because this sheet is too large. So that's where all of our costs came from. And then we rounded up to the nearest $50 because charging $673.31 for a permit would be bizarre. So that's where these numbers come from. It's based on our staff time. After that, there's additional permit fees. So the first is additional reviews in excess of 3. We have decided, so first of all, Tippecanoe County charges this exact same fee for this exact same item. I think it's very smart. One thing we run into a lot is a feeling that the designers either don't address our comments, don't respond to them, indicate in any way they saw them, and send things back just as they were. So the feeling that our staff will get is that we're being asked to design a project for the designer. We want to discourage that. That's why this manual is so in-depth, because we want to be very clear about what our expectations are so that this review process can go as quickly as possible. It's a complaint we get all the time, that our review takes forever, that they don't know how many times they're going to have to go through this. So any review in excess of 3, we're going to be charging $750 for a review. That is to de-incentivize folks not making changes or not just picking up the phone. If something's unclear about what a staff member's commented, just pick up the phone and ask them, as opposed to just ignore the comment and send it back. Then a request for variance or waiver from design standards is set at $250 per request, and that is that process I talked about earlier, where if you'd like to vary from what's in this manual, the project applicant can come before this board and ask for that variance, but our staff also have to do a lot of researching that goes into that. And we also we want a cost associated with it so that folks just don't come to this board asking for a variance from every page in this manual. Otherwise, why did we write it? Then finally, inspection fees. So reinspection for non-compliance, again, I did model this after Tippecanoe County. So when our inspector goes to a site, he tries to go to every site in the city that's active monthly. So if he goes to that site, it's non-compliant, and he has to come back. We want to have a fee associated with that, a small fee just to make up for his time. But the idea is we shouldn't have to inspect more than once a month. If we're having to come back to a site, we had one recently that I think he went to 9 times in 2 weeks. So we want to at least recuperate his time there. And then finally, reinspection for certificate of completion. So this is our closeout certificate, and we will be very clear about what the expectations, in fact, this is very clear, about what the expectations for a certificate of completion are. If we go through all of that, somebody asks for us to come out and check their project for a final time, and we have to keep coming back for that, it needs to be done the first time. And that's something I know David knows from planning. They charge for every occupancy inspection you ask for. So if folks know their site isn't done and they just figure they'll call city staff out to see if it happens to pass, we want to discourage that, because that's staff time that could be spent other ways. So the first inspection is on us. We're happy to do it. It's part of our jobs. But if we have to keep coming out, we want a fee associated with that. Okay. Any questions about the fee table?
Yes, Jim.
Thanks. I just want to make sure that I understand something. So if I've got a project that covers up to 5 acres,
okay,
it's going to cost so much in fees. If I have 20 acres that I'm disturbing, are you telling me that the acreage between 6 and 20 is actually less costly for the city? Because I'm generally opposed to things like, we pay for water, and if you use up to 5,000 gallons, you pay this, but if you use more, you pay less. So I want to make sure that's the true cost.
Yes, so that's an excellent question. That is how we modeled it for a couple of reasons. First, we don't see many developments that are over 5 acres within, the city limits, right? It's not very common. And when we do, a lot of times it is something that's it's a subdivision. So the cost to to review that isn't super high, because especially if it's just a single family subdivision, there actually isn't that much for us to review. It's just a lot of land, because a lot of single family houses take up a lot of land. So we still need to run the drainage calcs. We need to look at the systems and make sure that it's going to accommodate storm, and there's going to be a couple different probably detention basins within that subdivision. So it is going to take a fair amount of time. So $950 is not unreasonable, plus $50 an acre. But many of those acres are just going to be a single family house with, with a driveway. So there isn't really any additional stormwater considerations there. There are, of course, and so what we try to do is, again, balance out those that would not take much time. And then, for example, like the redevelopment of the hospital site that has taken immense amount of time. So like we're trying to balance out between those two, because we don't want to be, overly charging over for single family subdivision, but we also don't want to not capture costs when we're looking at.
That's the development I had in mind.
Yes, it is often the one we have in mind. Yes.
Clarify, is it $50 per acre above 5 or $50 total acre?
It is above 5. I can.
Yeah, I
add
would
that.
just say additional acre or something.
Okay, I can add that.
I have just a few questions.
Yes.
So this money will stay in stormwater,
Yes.
and I have really no idea how many permits you all are issuing every year. How many? What do those numbers look like?
So I think the easiest thing to compare it to is what the planning department had in the past, the grading permit, which was issued for any project disturbing 2,500 square feet or more that wasn't pretty much the same requirements we have. I think it looks like about 30 to 40, depending on the year.
Okay.
Believe it or not, I think 2020 was one of the highest years they had for grading permits. So it really depends on the year, but you're looking at tens, not hundreds
Okay.
or anything like that.
Thank you.
So yeah.
Okay.
And one addition I would add is we would be looking at, we talked about this at length during Title 13, we'd be looking at transportation projects that our engineering department's doing as well. So that's something that like planning has never looked at. So there would be maybe an additional 4 or 5 there.
Okay,
So
thank you. And then my last question would be, I appreciate your breakdown of the cost. That was great. Are we charging enough? I mean, I know that's just right. I mean, every one of those was just right there where the fee is. And I don't know, like, if our wages increase, then, like we are under getting it from the get-go. Not that I want to charge our customers who are wanting to seek permit. I don't want to,
sure.
Our purpose is to recoup for our time.
Right.
Beyond what we would expect to give.
Right.
So I guess, how long do we expect to, like if you're going off of West Lafayette, or Tippecanoe County's 2018 numbers, well, they might be looking at it right now to update for 2024. So
Right.
I just want to make sure that we're going into this where we can, if we're going to vote on it, and then this would have to go through the city council, correct?
The fee table?
Yes?
No.
No, okay, I'm sorry. I'm
No, they
confused with what
totally.
you told me and what was on here, and I was lost on where this goes.
And again,
This goes in the new draft in this here? No.
No. This
Sorry.
is sorry.
Where
I
is
know we
this?
have a lot of administrative documents that support what we do, and
Okay.
it's confusing. So this is the design manual. We're shelving this. We'll talk about it
Okay.
later. But this is an amendment to our rules and regulations.
Okay.
So yes, and it was confusing on the agenda, which again, 100% my fault.
Okay.
I didn't communicate well enough with Frank about what we were doing here. So all we're looking to do is remove the 2.5 pages that are currently in the rules and regs,
Okay, rules and regs.
on
Okay,
stormwater
thank
and
you.
replace it with fees.
So next time we could have this at the subcommittee meeting and then bring it to the whole group, just as a comment.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Our next
Right,
rules and regs will certainly come to the subcommittee.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just appreciate it. I just, that's an opportunity, I guess, to bring it to the subcommittee,
And-
to give the subcommittee some work.
I did want to answer your question a little bit
Yes.
about are we not charging enough?
Yeah.
So, obviously we're going to start with being a little conservative because we don't want we didn't charge a fee at all.
Right.
So if we come in, like a wrecking ball and suddenly we're charging thousands of dollars for disturbing a quarter acre, that's unreasonable. So, this is the best estimate we have. What we talked about doing is once this is enacted, starting to track our time
Okay.
to see how accurate it is to this table. And after 6 months, we'll reevaluate, based on the sizes of projects that have come through this process and see if this is accurate, and we'll report back.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Other questions? All right, so, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the Section 26 stormwater fees as presented with the note that the 5 or more acres would be $950 plus $50 per additional acre? So 6 plus would be, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. Next on the agenda, request for approval of change order number 3 with Reynolds Construction LLC for Dillman Wastewater Treatment Plant upgrade and efficiency improvements. Dan Hudson.
This has been a long meeting, so I'll be brief. I'm Dan Hudson, Capital Project Manager with the City of Bloomington Utility. And it's this change order number 3 for the Dillman Wastewater Treatment Plant upgrade and improvement efficiency project, which is now called Phase 1. This is just a wrap-up change order before the close of the project, and we have 2 credits on this. One is a approximately $6,000 credit for a general work allowance, and the other is a $14,000 credit for some concrete repair. The total amount for the credit is $20,666.46. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for Dan? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the change order number 3 with Reynolds Construction?
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have old business. Is there any old business from the board? Old business from staff?
None.
New business from the board? Yes, Jim.
Yeah, it's been a long meeting, and I do hate to take more time, but I think the comment I want to make is important for the ratepayers to hear. We are the Utility Service Board. We are the board that decides your rates, basically. And as you're aware, every so often, we must go to the Indiana Utilities Regulatory Board for any increase. And we take that very seriously because this board has 2 major goals, 2 major values. The first is to make sure that everyone has sufficient water and clean water. The second is that we take care of ratepayers so that we can keep their costs at a minimum. Okay, that's what we do. Other utilities do not operate this way. Most of you probably get your energy from Duke. Duke now has a proposal before the IURC for raising energy rates by about 32%. Some of those rates are based on things like guaranteeing Duke a profit that is now 9.5% and will be raised to 10.5%. Part of their reason for paying more rates, for requesting more rates, has to do with their dropping the ball when it came to continuous use of coal and some of the problems that they've had with coal ash. If they had a utility service board like this one, I would hope that board would not recommend such changes. So I just want people to know that rate changes for water go through a process that we take very seriously. Rate changes that may go through private enterprise like Duke are based on something different. So the next time you hear people who want to privatize your trash or privatize your water, I warn you to look at what the private industries are doing with regard to their rates. That's my rant and rave for the day.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you. I don't think we have can't add anything to that, Jim. Okay, well, thank you. Any other new business? New business from staff?
No.
No. There were no subcommittee meetings. Staff reports.
I just got one thing. I think she left. We have a new employee in communications. Renee Abram is her name. So if you call in after hours, I think she's on the second shift right now, which is 4 to midnight.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
may
I'm sorry.
speak
we
with her.
kept It was too long. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. I believe we do have some additional petitions and communications. We'll first start on Zoom. Or there are no comments to share? Okay. And then in the room, any additional communications? Okay.
I certainly don't want to keep you any longer.
You're okay?
Tim Hansen again.
Yes.
I appreciate everybody's consideration on this board. I appreciate staff's willingness to get together with the engineering community and I think the development community to a certain extent, but my information came from the engineering community and that's who I've been discussing this with. The BEDC is getting together this meeting on the 17th, primarily with the passage of this ordinance, with Title 13, with the county's recent passage of theirs. They wanted to bring their membership together that does do development, including some of the contractors, to have a better understanding of the differences between each jurisdiction's rules, because there are differences between them, even though their guiding principle that came from IDEM was the same. And so they wanted to facilitate that discussion so their membership could understand the differences. I'll try to work with staff to kind of pull the engineering community to the side and try to facilitate a discussion, because I don't know if the 3 hours we'll be able to go over details from this document, plus, I know they want to have about 2 hours to have input and presentation, and then about an hour of comments. But depending on the varied comments and where they go, it's going to hard to be constructive. So I'll try to work a separate track so this doesn't draw out and get some good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight, bringing this to our attention from your side of things. And we encourage you, like you've said, when your counterparts, to work with our staff to send in your comments, whether they can attend on the 17th or 16th or not. So we'll look forward to hearing your feedback through our staff. And again, you're always welcome to come and make public comments. So thank you for coming tonight and staying the whole time. So any other communications or petitions? All right. Oh, the last thing I should say is I want to thank all of our staff. I know our staff was really busy before. I'd see things, a post of break here and break there before the power outage. And I know my power was out from Tuesday to Friday, and I'm sure others had more and less. And I know that our plants were down for a time period. And I think everybody, just from what I heard, did a tremendous job. And I want to thank everyone for those efforts. And hopefully that we won't have that problem again for that extended period. But I know that we're prepared to take action and make happen what we need to when we do. So thank you to our staff. So, okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, everyone.